Hello, and welcome to this session where we will talk about the different integration options that are available in the One Click LCA plugin for Autodesk Revit. We will do a quick overview of the three different options, which are LCA in Cloud, LCA in Revit, and Revit to Excel to One Click LCA. And then we will also briefly look into these different options in the actual plugin within Revit. So the three different options, LCA in cloud. So with this option, we're able to get all the material quantities from our Revit model and export them directly to One Click LCA. Then we've got LCA in Revit, where we can basically conduct the entire assessment within Revit. So we can define the scope of our assessment and what materials from what elements do we want to include in this assessment. This then is being communicated to the One Click LCA platform, and One Click LCA sends back the results. So we get the results back in the actual Revit environment. We can do the hotspot analysis and optimize performance, but yeah, more on that later. And finally, we've got the Revit to Excel and Excel to One Click LCA option. So that means that we get the material quantities from Revit with any of the two options, either directly or we can define the scope first and then send them to One Click LCA, where we can then download this information in Excel format. We can review this information, we can adjust the data, we can add more materials, remove some materials that might not be relevant for our assessment, and then finally we can upload the Excel file instead to One Click LCA. So yeah, the process for LCA in cloud, it's very simple. You open the plugin and you click on the button, you get all the material quantities that exist in that Revit model directly exported to your One Click LCA account. And from that point onwards, you will need to do the mapping of the Revit materials with EPDs in the One Click LCA environment. Why would somebody use this option? Because it's quick. You don't need to do anything in Revit, so it is ideal for any of you that don't have any previous experience in Revit. Next option, the LCA in Revit. So here, as we said, you can define the scope and run the entire process in Revit or part of the process if you will. More on that in another session. You can also define the database that you want to use in your assessment. So that's very relevant for those of you that are doing assessments for compliance with regulations in some countries, and you have to use specific databases. You can get the results inside Revit, do the hotspot analysis in Revit, and optimize your performance in Revit. The main benefits of this process is that you can define the scope, so you leave irrelevant materials and elements out of the scope, and you get the results in Revit. So you get you get to do the hotspot analysis in Revit and reduce your embodied carbon directly in Revit. And the third option, it involves defining the scope first, so you can start with LCA in Revit to define the scope, and then before you proceed and get the results, you can actually send it to One Click LCA. So you export the materials to One Click LCA eventually. This is where you can download the materials from in an Excel format, review, adjust them as we said, and then upload the Excel. And this is when you start doing the mapping of the Revit materials with EPDs and get the results directly in One Click LCA. So reasons why we follow this process is because we can have better quality assurance of the data, and we can also locally store this data. So having them saved in an Excel file that sits in our computer. And let's have a quick look now on how this actually looks in Revit. So once you open your Revit model that you want to assess, and once you have installed the One Click LCA plugin for Revit, you'll be able to see the One Click LCA ribbon at the top of your screen. And then there are three buttons with two different options, LCA in Revit and LCA in Cloud. LCA in Cloud will simply take all the material quantities from your Revit model and will send them to your One Click LCA account. It's gonna take a few seconds and then it will open a separate sheet on your web browser. And from that process, from that point onwards, the process is exactly the same as with uploading any Excel sheet or data from any other source, which is going to be covered in a different lesson. So moving back to Revit, we can now have a look at LCA in Revit, which was the second integration option. So this will open the actual plugin within Revit. That's going to be a separate window with many different tabs, which are all explained in a separate lesson later on. But very briefly, in this case, you can define, for example, the database. You can define the scope, what kind of materials and elements you want to include, and how you can define that. There's plenty of different ways, which will be covered in a different video. And finally, you can go to the materials, do the mappings, get the results directly in the One Click LCA plugin for Revit, and keep optimizing your design within Revit. Or you can follow the third option, which, as we said, it's Revit to Excel to One Click LCA. So this involves sending the material quantities to the cloud first, either directly from the main ribbon within Revit, or once you have defined your assessment scope in the LCA in Revit option. So let's assume that this is what we did. We opened LCA in Revit, we went through the first few tabs, and now we have defined the scope and we want to send these materials to the cloud. So we're gonna click on that. And there we are. I'm gonna use, actually there's no need to upload it in a specific project. We will just download our data in Excel directly. And once this is done, we will open it. There we are. We can now see all the data that we got from Revit. Every row represents a different material from Revit. So now we can do any adjustments that we want. We can change the names, we can change the material quantities, we can change the family names, type names to anything that we want. We can also add extra columns with additional information that we might want to get to One Click LCA. We can add materials that don't exist. We can remove materials that exist here and we don't want them, for example, furniture and things like that, that might not be relevant. And once we are ready, we save it and we upload this Excel file instead of the Revit model. And that's the end of this session. Thank you very much.